Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we cut through the noise to bring you the essential insights you need to be truly well-informed.
Today, we're diving into a story that almost sounds like something out of a political thriller.
It really does. It's this surprising and, frankly, intense intersection of national economic policy and a multi-billion-dollar architectural renovation.
Yeah, how often do you hear about a building project becoming like the central flashpoint in a high-stakes fight over interest rates?
It's pretty remarkable, and we're going to unpack it for you today.
So our deep dive is going to explore these recent and, well, escalating tensions surrounding the Federal Reserve.
We're looking at two main things, right?
Exactly. First, the Fed's absolutely crucial role in managing the U.S. economy. We'll look especially at its current stance on interest rates, amidst inflation concerns and the impacts of these new tariffs.
And then the second part.
Then we shift gears to the highly publicized and, yes, politically charged $2.5 billion renovation of the Fed's historic Washington, D.C. headquarters.
Right. And we've pulled insights from, well, quite a stack of sources for you. Financial news outlets, official Fed statements, administration briefings, the works.
And our mission today is really to distill the most important nuggets of knowledge from all that material.
Helping you understand the complexities of this unfolding situation without getting totally bogged down in information overload.
We'll lay out the facts, look at the arguments from, well, all sides as presented in our sources.
And talk about what it all potentially means for you.
Okay, so let's start with the economic front. The Federal Reserve, it has these fundamental responsibilities mandated by Congress.
The core mission.
Right. Maintaining price stability, that means managing inflation. Promoting maximum sustainable employment, keeping unemployment low, and providing for moderate long-term interest rates. Those three things.
Often called the dual mandate, though it sounds like three things.
Yeah, it's often summarized that way. And right now, the spotlight is definitely on those interest rates.
Yeah. We saw at the Federal Open Market Committee, the FOMC meeting back in June 2025, they held interest rates steady, 4.25% to 4.50%.
Yep, and that was actually the third meeting in a row this year where rates stayed put. No change.
Despite a lot of speculation, I might add.
Absolutely. And the context for that decision, it comes partly from their updated economic projections.
What are those looking like?
Well, the Fed's updated outlook for 2025 suggests a slightly downgraded economic picture compared to, say, their March estimates. They're now anticipating 1.4% GDP growth. That's down from 1.7%.
Okay, a bit slower growth.
And slightly higher core personal consumption expenditure, PCE inflation. That's the Fed's preferred measure. It's now projected at 3.1%, up from 2.8%.
And just for reference, the other big inflation number, the CPI.
Right, the Consumer Price Index. Yeah. That was 2.4% year over year back in May 2025. So inflation is still a concern, clearly.
So the Fed's seeing maybe slightly slower growth, slightly stickier inflation, but what's really adding to the uncertainty is there something specific complicating their job?
Yes. This is where it gets really interesting, as you said. Fed Chair Jerome Powell specifically pointed to President Donald Trump's trade initiatives.
The tariffs.
Exactly. The higher tariffs being implemented. Powell said they introduced, quote, significant uncertainty into the economic outlook.
Did he elaborate on how?
He did. He stated, it takes some time for tariffs to work their way through the chain of distribution to the end consumer. And then added, we expect to see more impacts this year.
So the full effect isn't even here yet. And he warned about the potential consequences too, didn't he? Didn't hold back much.
No. He warned that sustained large tariff increases could, and I quote, generate a rise in inflation, a slowdown in economic growth, and an increase in unemployment.
Wow. Inflation and slower growth and higher unemployment.
He even used the word stagflation to describe that potential scenario. That's a very serious warning from the Fed chair.
Stagflation, that's the nightmare scenario, right? High inflation and stagnant economy. So if Trump's tariffs could lead there, how does that square with the administration also pressuring the Fed to lower rates?
It puts them in an incredibly difficult position. Almost impossible, you could say.
Yeah.
It really highlights the tightrope they're walking. If they cut rates while tariffs are potentially pushing inflation up, they risk, losing control of prices.
Making inflation worse.
Precisely. But if they hold rates steady or even hike them, they could be accused of stifling growth, especially if the economy is already slowing because of those same tariffs.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't, almost.
It feels a bit like that. That's why Rob Hamworth, he's a senior investment strategy director at U.S. Bank Asset Management Group. He explained the Fed's current approach really well. He called it wait and see.
Waiting for more data?
Exactly. Hayworth said, "The Fed is waiting on the data. It started cutting rates last year based on rising unemployment and slower inflation. Until we get major data changes like that, they'll remain extremely cautious about cutting interest rates further."
So data-dependent, cautious, and watching those tariffs closely makes sense.
And it's not just about the main interest rate either. The Fed also uses its balance sheet.
Right. The bonds they hold, quantitative easing, quantitative tightening.
Yeah, they've been shrinking that balance sheet, reducing their bond holdings. It peaked near $9 trillion back in 2022. Now it's down to around $6.4 trillion.
Still huge, but smaller.
Definitely. And they recently adjusted how fast they're shrinking it. Back in April 2025, they slowed the pace of reducing Treasury securities quite significantly, down to $5 billion a month from $25 billion.
So a bit less tightening on that front. What about mortgage-backed securities?
They're continuing to let those roll off at about $35 billion a month, so still tightening, but a slightly gentler pace overall, especially on the Treasury side.
Okay. So the Fed's being cautious, watching data, worried about tariffs. But what does the market think? What are investors expecting?
Well, that's interesting, too. Despite the Fed's, cautious language, market expectations seem a bit more optimistic about cuts. Investors are currently pricing in or anticipating maybe 2 rate cuts later in 2025.
Oh, really? When?
The general expectation seems to be for the first cut maybe around September or October.
So there's a gap there.
Okay.
The Fed sounds hesitant. The market's leaning towards cuts.
There's definitely a divergence, and that difference in expectations, that itself can create some market volatility down the line.
Okay, so that's the economic tightrope. Complex forces, high stakes. But as we hinted at the start, there's this whole other drama playing out.
The building site drama.
Exactly. The massive renovation of their D.C. headquarters. It's become, well, less about bricks and mortar and more about political power plays.
That's a good way to put it. This major renovation project, it involves 2 specific historic buildings.
Which ones?
The Mariner S. Eccles building that was completed in 1937 and the 1951 Constitution Avenue building, which confusingly was actually completed in 1932.
Okay, historic buildings clearly needing work eventually, but the cost is what's drawing fire.
Bingo. The estimated cost has now climbed to $2.5 billion.
$2.5 billion. Wow. How does that compare to earlier estimates?
It's a significant jump. Initial estimates were more in the range of $1.7 billion or maybe $1.9 billion before 2020. So it's gone up considerably.
So what's the Fed's justification for such a massive project and cost?
Well, they frame it as a really comprehensive overhaul. These buildings haven't seen major renovations since they were built back in the 1930s.
So nearly a century.
Pretty much. They stress it's a necessity for, basic safety and health. They need to do major structural repairs, remove hazardous materials.
With asbestos,
lead contamination, yes. And replace completely antiquated systems. Electrical, plumbing, HVAC, fire detection, suppression systems. Some of this stuff literally dates back to the 1930s. Yeah. Jerome Powell himself put it bluntly. He said the Eccles building was not really safe and it was not waterproof.
Okay, so they're arguing it's essential maintenance, not like a luxury upgrade.
That's their core argument. Plus modernization, bringing the buildings up to current codes for accessibility, security, safety. And they also argue there are long-term cost savings. By consolidating operations into these renovated buildings, they can reduce what they spend on leasing external office space.
Makes sense on paper, but enter the politics.
Exactly. Here's where the political tensions really ramp up. The Trump administration and President Trump himself have been very vocal, consistently calling for Powell to lower interest rates.
Right, arguing high rates hurt growth, make mortgages expensive, increase government borrowing costs.
All of that.
Right.
And President Trump hasn't minced words about Powell personally. He's called him terrible, a numbskull, Mr. Too Late. Very public criticism.
And now this renovation project has become a tool in that fight.
A very direct tool, it seems. The administration is leveraging these renovation costs, framing them almost as a potential, quote, fireable offense for Powell.
A fireable offense over a building renovation? How?
The criticisms are quite pointed. OMB Director Russell Vought sent a letter to Powell expressing serious concerns about what he called an ostentatious overhaul.
Ostentatious. What specifically did they point to?
Vaught's letter mentioned things like private dining rooms, rooftop garden terraces, water features, marble decor, and a private elevator. Things that sound, luxurious.
And President Trump echoed that.
He did. He said something like he didn't see in him, Powell, a guy that needed a palace to live in.
Wow. And it wasn't just OMB and the president?
No, HUD Secretary Scott Turner jumped in, too. He publicly criticized Powell, saying, "It's rich that an unelected bureaucrat like Powell is wasting billions of taxpayer dollars on building renovations while Americans struggle to buy homes due to high mortgage rates."
Ouch. And he contrasted it with HUD moving out of D.C.
Yeah, he mentioned HUD's own cost-saving relocation as a contrast. It's a very direct accusation of fiscal mismanagement, aimed squarely at Powell.
And the criticism didn't stop there, right? There were even accusations of lying.
That's correct. It escalated further.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Polt, who's a Trump-appointed director at the Federal Housing Finance Agency, and Representative Anna Paulina Luna, a key Trump ally in Congress.
What did they claim?
They accused Powell of lying to Congress about the renovations. Representative Luna actually referred Powell to the Department of Justice for alleged perjury.
Perjury. That's taking it to a whole new level. It's not just political sparring anymore.
No, it's become quite serious, involving formal referrals and legal accusations.
And they're applying pressure in other ways, too.
Yes. To increase the scrutiny, Trump appointed two close aides, James Blair and Will Scharf, to the National Capital Planning Commission, that's the NCPC, specifically to review the Fed's plans very closely.
Putting people on the oversight board?
Exactly. And President Trump himself is scheduled to visit the Fed headquarters on July 24th, 2025. The timing suggests it's to amplify the pressure personally.
It really is a full court press, as you said. So how is the Fed responding to all this? To these specific accusations about luxury features?
Well, Powell and the Fed have pushed back directly, trying to dispel these claims of luxury.
Okay, like what about the rooftop gardens?
They clarified that the rooftop garden terraces aren't lavish party spaces. They refer to either a ground-level lawn area built over underground parking or just standard vegetated roofs. Those green roofs are actually pretty common on federal buildings now for stormwater management and energy efficiency.
Okay. What about the private dining rooms?
The Fed says those are just renovated conference rooms that are sometimes used for meetings that happen over mealtimes. Not exclusive. Fancy dining halls.
And the private elevator.
Doesn't exist, according to the Fed. Any elevator upgrades are purely for accessibility compliance, meeting modern standards.
Water features. Marble.
New water features were apparently cut from the plans. They are restoring some original fountains in the Eccles building as part of historic preservation. And the marble. They say it's mostly salvaged original marble being reused. New marble is only being used where the original is damaged beyond repair or where historic preservation guidelines require it. Powell specifically said these items were not the cost drivers.
So if those luxury items aren't driving the cost up, what is, according to the Fed, why the $2.5 billion price tag?
They point to several factors. One is unforeseen conditions discovered during the work.
Right.
Finding significantly more asbestos and lead contamination than they initially anticipated. Also dealing with a higher than expected water table. Washington, D.C.'s swamp-like conditions causing issues.
Right. Surprises hidden in old buildings. That can definitely inflate costs.
Absolutely. They also point to the huge surges in material and labor costs that happened post-pandemic. They mentioned steel prices, for example, skyrocketing.
Okay. Supply chain inflation hitting a massive project hard.
Seems to be a big part of it. And finally, they mentioned design changes required by various review agencies during the planning process.
So unforeseen issues, massive cost inflation, and regulatory changes. That's their explanation for the budget increase.
That's the gist of it, yes. They're essentially saying it's the reality of renovating nearly century-old buildings in a post-pandemic world, plus unexpected site conditions.
And how are they addressing the concerns about oversight and taxpayer money?
They emphasize the project is heavily overseen. It's managed by the Senate-confirmed Board of Governors. It's subject to annual budget approval. And it's audited by their own independent Office of Inspector General, the OIG.
So internal checks and balances.
Yes, and they also highlight that they've been cooperating extensively and voluntarily with external review agencies like that NCPC, where the Trump appointees now sit.
And Powell himself called for an investigation.
He did. He actually called for a formal probe by the Fed's own watchdog, the OIG, specifically into the renovation costs. It seems like an attempt to counter the accusations with transparency.
Okay, so that's the back and forth on the renovation itself. What does this clash mean for the bigger picture, for the Fed as an institution?
Well, this whole dispute, it really goes far beyond just a building project. It represents a pretty unprecedented challenge to the Federal Reserve's traditional independence.
Independence from political pressure, you mean?
Exactly. The Fed maintains its decisions, whether on interest rates or operations, are, quote, rooted in its data-dependent approach to managing inflation and economic growth, not driven by politics.
And why is that independence considered so important?
Well, experts like Sung-Won Sun, he's a finance and economics professor, argue that compromising the Fed's independence would be, in his words, bad for the economy and bad for inflation expectations.
How so?
It risks undermining public and market confidence in the Fed's decisions. If people think monetary policy is being set for short-term political gain rather than long-term economic stability.
It could lead to more instability, maybe higher inflation, if people expect it.
That's the concern. It could make markets more volatile and make it harder for the Fed to actually achieve its goals of stable prices and maximum employment. It tests the very foundation of how the Fed operates.
But the Fed isn't totally unaccountable, right? You mentioned oversight.
Correct. They do have accountability mechanisms. They give semi-annual testimonies to Congress, they publish numerous reports, and they are subject to oversight from their OIG and also the Government Accountability Office, the GAO.
So there is scrutiny, just meant to be perhaps less overtly political.
That's the traditional idea, yes. Oversight and accountability, but insulated from day-to-day political interference in its core monetary policy decisions. This situation is really pushing the boundaries of that tradition.
And what about Powell's own future? President Trump mentioned firing him.
Well, President Trump has said publicly it's highly unlikely he would actually fire Powell.
But the constant pressure, the public criticism, the accusations, the scrutiny over the renovation.
Exactly. It all raises significant questions about the rest of Powell's term, which officially ends in May 2026. This intense battle over the Fed's independence, both in policy and operations, seems far from over.
So to recap, we have the Federal Reserve trying to navigate these incredibly complex economic headwinds, inflation, tariffs, growth concerns,
while simultaneously having to defend its operational autonomy, its budget, and this multi-billion-dollar building renovation against intense and escalating political scrutiny from the White House.
It's quite a confluence of pressures.
It really is.
You know, the Federal Reserve is often described as something like the ship's autopilot system, designed for stable navigation through economic waters.
That's a common analogy.
But what happens when the White House tries to, metaphorically, grab the helm? What does that mean for the reliability of the journey? And maybe more importantly, how do the passengers, that's you, perceive the stability of the whole economic ship?
That's a really critical question.
So maybe something to consider is how this ongoing tension might shape not just the future path of interest rates, but perhaps the very definition, or at least the practice, of independent governance in the U.S. financial landscape going forward.
A fundamental question indeed.